the one, the only, Ben Sion. Okay, good morning and welcome to Yeshiva YouTube. Just Daf It. An exciting Daf today. Daf Nun Beis, number 52 in Maseches Nazir, discussing about a skull and about vertebrae, your spinal cord. What makes you tummy? You need both the spinal cord and the skull, or each one independently? This is, I'm sure, a discussion most people have been waiting for. Counting down the days before they go to sleep, have a calendar, they cross off the days. When are we getting Daf Nun Beis? Daf Nun Beis, Daf Nun Beis. Shedrock Golus. Skull and the spinal cord, or spinal cord and the skull? I'm sure there's even some doctors out there who are listening to this share that are wondering, what could it be? I mean, you can't live with just vertebrae. You can't live with just a skull. You need both of them. So we have not even an answer, because the Gemara doesn't even answer the question, but we have a discussion about it. So let's start from the bottom of Nun Aleph from Abiz. 3 lines from the bottom, the last word of the line. Boy Rava. Rava asked an interesting question. Namola, an ant, Shechasra, Mahu. An ant loses its leg. I don't know how you figured out the ant loses its leg. Maybe he's not crawling so well. Maybe you look under a microscope. Mahu, Shira Gemirin La V'Hachaser. Right? The concept that an amola is less than a kazayas, right? In order to be chayav malchus for eating an ant, right? The only reason you're chayav for eating an ant is kiberia, because it's its own creature, right? Normally the shear for eating an ant is a kazayas, but the Gemara Mako says a beria, if it's a live one, you be chayav multiple sets of malchus for eating a live ant. Shira Gmir La Hachasar, it's missing a leg. Or Birya Gmir La. Or the fact Birya means a complete entity, but it's living, right? It's missing a leg, it's not integral to its life, it's still living. Va'ika, and it's still considered a Birya. So the top one base of an Aleph, Amar Yehuda with this Karisa, Tashma, I try to bring a proof for this. Bahem, this pasuk is talking about Shemona Shratzim. There's 8 type of creatures which are metame, right? Not all types of Shratzim, creepy, crawly creatures are metame. Only 8 of them, the Torah says. If you touch them, only 8 of them. Bahem, when it talks about them, it says Bahem, right? With a base. Yachal v'kulan, you might think you have to touch the entire thing. Talmud Lomer, Mehem. It says Mehem, a part of them. Imehem, Yachal Miksasin, you might even think a part of them. Talmud Lomer, Bahem. Bahem sounds like the entire thing. Okay, it's that. Achiga Miksasin Shuka Kulan. It has to be a significant amount, even if it's part of it, but it has to be like the entire thing. The shear for touching Shemona Shratzim is adasha, is the size of a lentil. Obviously, a lentil is smaller than a kazayas, than an olive. Kazayas is the shear for achila. An amola, we're talking about eating it. An amola is not one of the Shemona Shratzim. We're talking about here a tuma, right? One of the Shemona Shratzim, a mouse is one of the Shemona Shratzim, maybe a hyrax, I don't know, a rabbit. A snail. So the reason they came up with Shir Adasha, the smallest one of them, a chomet, a snail, right? When it's first born, the size of a whole snail is Adasha, is the size of a lentil. So therefore, you see, right? We learn it out of an entire chomet, an entire snail, right? So you see, it has to be exactly that size, and if it's missing a little bit, right? So then it's not. Amar Shmaya Kibain and Shura Dibdalo Havia Kadasha. Lo Matamid Lanafal Banashama. When we learn out of a snail, right, there you need the shear, the entire shear of Adasha, right? That's what we're talking about when the snail is first born, because when the snail is first born, usually a snail is born complete. So in order for the snail to be born, to get a neshama, right? We talked about Gulim yesterday, reincarnations. You can be reincarnated as a snail. Isn't that interesting? Imagine living the life of a snail. It's actually very possible. So that when it's first born, right, that could be, it has a neshama. Aval nafla neshama, but once it has a neshama, it's an ant, right? It's born a complete ant. Loti bayalach, right? Maybe that case, even if it lost a leg, it's still sufficient enough ground. It's still called a kabiria. It's still called significant enough in order to be chayiv malchus for eating it. This is a very difficult question. Basically, it's a question about a birya. Does a birya have to be whole, mamish, or does it have to be basically enough whole that it lives on? It's actually a very lumdish shaila. It's a very analytical type of question. I will explain this more. The concept of birya in Ian of Ben Sion. I have a fundamental chakira, a fundamental investigation, exactly why a birya is like a shear. We'll talk about Chatzi Shir, Birya, very interesting, Ian Ben Sion. Not so relevant. I mean, it's relevant to this Gemara, but it's also relevant to other aspects of halacha. So the Gemara says, "Yiboilu Hashedra Gogolis." The Mishnah continues that the Shedra Gogolis, the spine, the spinal cord, and the skull, make an Nazir Migaleach, makes him stop counting as Nazir and start over again. Yiboilu Shedra Gogolis Nan. Odilma O Shedra Gogolis. Does it have to be both a spinal cord and a skull? Or maybe one or each or the other, one or the other. Amurava Tashma. The Brisa says, Shedra Shagired Rov Eloyan Shabba. If you have a spinal cord of a dead person, and you took most of the ribs, right? The ribs are attached to the spinal cord. You took the ribs from the front part off. Tahora. It's not mitami. Uvekever, however, once you bury it, afilu mishuberes furekes tmei. Even if the ribs are separated, as long as you bury the ribs with the spinal cord, it's mitami bnei kever, because now it's joined together in the grave. So therefore, it's like it's connected. Taimo mishum de gired. The reason is because you took the ribs off. Halo gired. If you didn't take the ribs off, tame. It would be tame. Shamina oshad rogagolos. You see, the spinal cord itself is enough to be mitami. Sharalot kasani. The Gemara says ha lo kasani. The Gemara rejects this. It doesn't say because lo kasani. Hakamash malan. All the Brisa meant to say the chigire tahora. Irach tibaylach. Right. It was just talking about a question where maybe you had a spinal cord attached to a skull, right? And it's saying if you took off the ribs, so then it's Torah. But maybe, right, by itself, right, a Shadrong Golis, you need both of them to be Matame, right? You need the ribs also, but maybe it's not saying, it wasn't just talking about a spinal cord by itself, maybe it's talking about a spinal cord with a head. And the chiddush was that if you take the ribs off, it's not Matame anymore. Tashma. Let's try to bring another proof. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shishas Varim, Rabbi Kiva Matam Mecham Matar. We'll enumerate these 6 things soon. Rabbi Kiva says 6 things are Tame. Chum say these things are Tor. Rabbi Kiva retracted from his words. They brought a basket full of bones from a dead person to a shul of the coppersmiths, I guess in Yerushalayim, and they left it outside. They didn't want to bring it inside the shul because it would be matami ba'oel. But nichnas tudus harofe, tudus the doctor came. They wanted to measure it. Inkan shedra mimei sechad. They looked through the bones and said there's not a complete vertebrae, complete spinal cord from one person. Time was like a shedra the mechada because there's no complete vertebrae spinal cord from one person. Haika oshedra gogolos to mechada nazir galeach shramina oshedra gogolos nan. Right? He specifically said there's no one whole shedra. If there was one whole shedra, that'd be enough, even though it didn't have a skull attached to it. Shamina shedra gogolos nan. The Gemara says, "Let me buy a Gemara." The Gemara rejects this. Let me buy a shedra gogolos to meisachad leika. All Tudas Harofa was saying is that, of course, there's not even a shedra and a gogolos, right? Combined with a gogolos, spinal cord and a skull together from one person, leika, right? Which is significant because that is the shear to be matame for a nazir to have to migaleach. Ela afilo, what was he saying? Afilo oshedra meisachad gogolos meirachad leika. He was just saying the facts. He's saying there's not even one spinal cord or one skull from one person, right? As he was saying the facts. But technically, really, right, you need a combination of both to matami. Tashma minyana. Let's bring a proof from the counting and the number. The previous price, Rekiva's matami is 6 things. Come say they're tor. What are those 6 things? Rekiva's matami. Let's say you have a limb of a dead person that gets separated from the dead person, and you can reconstruct the limb. Let's say half of the arm comes from one dead person, the top half of the arm. I believe the bone is called the humerus, and the bottom part, the radius and the ulna, they come from a different person. Or living, right? Two people had their arm cut off, and you combine their arms, right? That's matami. A half a kav weight of random bones that comes from two different people. Again, chatzi kav is a shear, as we mentioned yesterday, for Nazir to Megaleach, which is double the shear for a regular tumah. Even if you have half a revius of dam from one person and half a revius dam from the other person, and they combine, that's good enough to mitame. Normally, the shear for a bone to be mitame is the shear of a saora, a barley seed, and if it's half a barley seed from one and half a barley seed from another, that's good. And the sixth thing is a shadrel and a spinal cord and a skull. So the Gemara says, the Gemara brings a proof from this, top of Nun Beis Nun Beis. If you'll tell me it's either one is sufficient to be mitame, to megaleach aleh, hani shiva havyan, right? If you list shadrel and golas separately, so then it's 7 things. You count the Brisa, so there's 7 things that Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim argue about. So the Gemara gives a couple answers to this question. Really, I'll tell you, Shadra and Golas are one thing. You need Shadra and Golas together, right? Right? In the previous Brisa, I just said, Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim argue about 6 things. A different Brisa says, these are the things they argue about. But the first Brisa says the 6 things they argue about, right? It could be that it didn't include one of the things, the Brisa which enumerated the things they argue, it didn't have a number, right? So it could be 7, but the Brisa says 6 didn't include one of the 7. And what didn't include? Etzem Kisaora, right? That 2 bones from 2 different dead people that are the sheer half a barley seed together, and 2 of them together make up a full barley seed. It's only a yachid. They're abundant in arguing. Only one person argues on Rabbi Akiva. The Tanya etzem kasar denech l'shnayim Rabbi Akiva matame. Riyachan Nuri b'tayir. We see explicitly Riyachan Nuri is a yachid, not the abundant argue. Just one rabbi argued on Rabbi Akiva, so therefore it wasn't included. V'bay Yisema, a different answer. Gazani Avram min Ames, Avram min Achai lo kasani. The 6 things didn't include Avram min Achai. Right? Because Avram min Ames, Avram min Achai are similarly the same thing. They're redundant. So therefore, it wasn't included. It was counted as one thing. Right? The 6 things that it talked about only talked about things where the Nazir would have to shave his head and start counting again. Also, when he came under the OL, came under the same roof as the thing which is matame. Like we said explicitly in the Mishnah, etzem kasaora, even though it's matame, it makes a Nazir megaleach if he touches it or he carries it, but being under the OL, it doesn't. Another answer, right? The Brisa which says 6 things they argue about, and then they said Kulon Rabbi Akiva was choser bo, so it didn't include one thing that he wasn't choser bo. What's the one that he wasn't choser? Revius dam, right? A revius dam that came from 2 mason. Rabbi Akiva held on to that sheet for the rest of his life that it is matam. And Amar le Rabbi lebar kapara. Rabbi said the bar kapara lo tishna revius dam bechazar. Don't say Rabbi Akiva was choser bo. He retracted. He said revius dam. Sharei limudo Rabbi Akiva biyad. He was always holding on to this teaching. V'oda mikra Messiah, he had a pasuk that he was bringing as proof. I'll call nafshos meis lo yavo. We learned previously. Why does the Torah say nafshos plural, and then meis is singular? To tell me that even revius dam that comes from shnei meisim is medame. Rabbi Shimon Omer, ad yomav hayamatame im mishemeis chazer ba'eni yodeya. He says the entire life of Rabbi Akiva, he said a revius dam that comes from 2 people is medame. And he said, after he died, I don't know if he was choser bo. Sounds like Rabbi Shimon was saying, Rabbi Akiva got it wrong. And maybe after he died, he realized he was wrong. Once he said that, Tana hushkaru shina v'imnei taniosa. Once Rabbi Shimon, who was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, said that, he regretted after saying that because he slighted his Rebbe, right? Saying that his Rebbe was wrong. So therefore, he fasted so much that his teeth became black because he was the tshuva for saying something bad about his Rebbe. Tashma. We still haven't answered this question. Right? Beishamai says the amount of Yatami is Rova hakaf, of atzamas of bones, of scattered bones. O mishnayim mishlosha, or 2 or 3 bones is matame. Ubeisel omrim rova min agvia, mirova binyan or mirova minyan. He says a rova akav comes from anywhere on the body combined, but it has to be mirova binyan, mirova minyan. It has to be the bones. It's not sufficient that it has to weigh a rova, a fourth of a kav. It also has to be rov ha-binyan or rov ha-minyan. Meaning, rov ha-binyan means the bones have to constitute a majority of the person's body, or a majority of the amount of bones. The article says there's 248 bones I guess because we say 240 ramach evorim, so they assume there's 248 bones. I don't know scientifically how many bones are in a person's body. So rov ha-minyan will be 125 bones. Amar Rabbi Yeshua heard this. He said, "Yechlani la'asos dira beisham dira b'tzelok echad." Beisham are not arguing. When they said 2 or 3 bones, they didn't mean any 2 or 3 bones. The 2 thigh bones, which basically is called in English is called the femur, the 2 femurs. Are the bones between the ankle and the knee. Shokayim are the tibia and fibia. Yarach echad is 1 femur. Omishnei yarachayim, or 2 thighs, 2 femurs with shok echad, and 1 kev, which is basically 1 fibia and tibia. Hoil virov govo, it doesn't have to be fibia and tibia, 1 of the 2 bones. Hoil virov govo shal adam, right? Most of a person's height is from his legs, right? So if you have the bones that constitute his legs, that's good. Migov Beisil Omrim and Beisil adds on Minagvia Omirov Binyan Omirov Minyan. He was agreeing with Beit Shammai, right? Rov Binyan, right? That's the first thing he said, which is the legs make up most of the height of a person. Or Rov Minyan, even if they're not from the legs. He's just adding on to Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai would agree with him also, because you have places in the body, the hands and the feet, which have tons of little bones in them. If you have the hands and the bones, I don't know if that constitutes 125 bones. I don't think so. But there's places in the body which don't take up most of the height of a person. Yes, yet they are most of the bones of a person. Now, and just for clarification, the Mesazim Sechas Olos, Rov Binyan, you don't need Rova HaKav. You don't need the weight of Rova HaKav. Here we're talking about bones that are slightly missing parts of them. They're not complete bones. As the article points out. Shammai Omer, Shammai, not Beit Shammai, Shammai, the original elder Shammai, who is Talmidim. Oh, it said something else. Shammai said, even 1 bone from the spinal cord or the skull, even part of the skull. So you see what? Shammai not only, right, certainly it's not, you don't need Shedra and Golgolas, right? It even says 1 bone from the Shedra, 1 bone from the Golgolas, that's enough. So certainly you don't need Shedra and Golgolas. You don't need a spinal cord combined with a skull. So you see from Shammai, right, that you don't need, one or the other. And the Gemara says, Shiny Shammai de Machmir. You can't bring a word from Shammai, he was Machmir. So the Gemara says, Livshal Minat, time to be Shammai de Machmir, time to Shammai. The correct here is to be Shammai. Shammai is Machmir, Harabanan, I mean, the Rabbanan, Beit Shammai, Beisila, Ad Ika Sher Golgolas. They're Machmir, but everyone else would say you need both. You need an entire spinal cord and you need the Golgolas, the skull together. The Gemara said, Lo, Ad Kan Lo Pligi, Rabbanan Alad, the Shammai, Elab Etzem, Echad, right? What did Shammai said? He even said 1 bone from the spinal cord. I believe there's 18 bones in the spinal cord. But if you have an entire spinal cord, an entire skull, even 1 of them would be sufficient enough to matame. The Gemara starts a new discussion here by Rav Chama, so we'll stop over here. I hope you enjoyed today's share. Stay tuned for Iyot Ben Sion. We'll talk about the concept of birya, a complete entity, an amala, an ant, even though it's less than Shara Kazayas, right? You get malchus for it. What about if the ant is missing a leg? The Gemara had a question about that. The Gemara didn't give an answer. I'll tell you what the Gemara really was asking, and try, even though the Gemara doesn't give an answer, try to figure out what the answer might be. Iyot Ben Sion coming up next.